Subcommittee on Energy and Mineral Resources will come to order. Subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on H.R. 934, the Health Benefits for Minors Act of 2019, and H.R. 935, the Minors Pension Protection Act of 2019. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking minority member or their designees. I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they're submitted to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. today. Hearing no objection, so ordered. To begin, I want to thank our witnesses for being here, or our witness now, and our later witnesses for being here. And I want to thank all those in the audience and those in our other hearing room watching this on TV for coming to Washington to share your stories and to press your case that we in Congress need to fulfill our obligations that you have earned through decades of backbreaking labor that helped make this country what it is. For decades, coal miners supplied the United States with the coal that kept the lights on. Coal miners built the world's largest economy at the expense of their health and their lives. And coal miners were instrumental in winning World War II. In 1946, the federal government and coal mining companies made a promise to those miners. The government and the companies promised that because of their important role in building our country, UMWA, United Mine Workers of America, coal miners would be guaranteed health benefits and pensions when they retired. The promise has been affirmed repeatedly over the past 70 years by Congress and by Republicans and Democratic administrations alike. But over time, through no fault of their own, these workers have been losing the security that they worked so hard to earn. Our energy mix is moving away from coal. But that does not mean we can leave the workers or their families behind. Coal company bankruptcies have put the UMWA health benefits and pension funds in crisis. If these funds fail, more than 100,000 retired miners and their families could be left out in the cold, while a handful of coal company executives game the bankruptcy system and hoard the windfalls for themselves. Coal company bankruptcies show no sign of stopping, and each time it happens, we inevitably hear about restructuring and assets being transferred and new companies being formed from the wreckage. And we also hear that generations-old responsibilities to pay for the retired, the sick, the widows, and the widowers, these responsibilities are lifted. The coal companies restructure and continue on with business as usual. Their workers and their retirees end up bearing the burden. The people at the top always seem to make out just fine. The people who helped them get there are the collateral damage. That is flat out wrong. These companies are breaking their promise. There are stories that companies are intentionally manipulating the system to get freed of their responsibilities. If that's the case, then this is more than a case of economics no longer favoring coal. It means that there's something wrong with the entire system. We don't have the ability to change bankruptcy laws in this committee, but we do have the ability and the responsibility to make sure that those people who are getting hurt are still taken care of. There is very little time left to act. As even more companies have declared bankruptcy over the past year, the funding situation has reached a breaking point. The pension fund will be insolvent as early as 2022, and some retirees may lose health benefits as early as this fall. Congress passed temporary fixes over the past few years, but these fixes have only extended the uncertainty and suffering that retired miners and their families have been shouldering for years. It's past time for a permanent solution, and it's time we kept our promise to the miners who built our country. That's exactly what H.R. 934 and H.R. 935 will do. With that, I look forward to the testimony today, and I now recognize Ranking Member Gosar for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Lowenthal, and thanks to all the witnesses for coming here today. Representative McKinley, we appreciate your leadership and testimony as well. The two bills we're considering today seek to address shortfalls in the health care and pension benefits promised to union miners decades ago by the United Mine Workers of America and the coal companies which employed them. Our miners deserve the best health care and pension benefits available, but unfortunately, the promise of reliable lifetime coverage has not been kept. The 1974 pension plan is just a few years away from becoming insolvent, putting over 100,000 miners at risk, and recent bankruptcies have resulted in the termination of health coverage for about 1,200 retirees and their families. Our miners deserve better. They spent decades working in coal mines to provide their communities and country with reliable and affordable energy. Their hard work powered our schools, hospitals, and businesses, enabling innovation and technology advancements, and have benefited every American citizen. Nowadays, we hear folks on the left denigrating the cheap, dependable energy these hardworking Americans provided to all of us, when in fact their contributions to our economy and our livelihoods should be celebrated. While we all want to see a solution to the looming insolvency of these funds, we must take a hard look at how we got here, how we can better manage these funds going forward, and how to get them on the right track, and whether taxpayers should ultimately have to foot the bill. United Mine Workers of America's pension plan is only 29.9% funded and is projected to run out of funds in 2022. If the pension plan runs out of funds, the plan will receive assistance from the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation multi-employer pension program, which in itself is in danger of becoming insolvent. While the UMWA has nearly $6.5 billion in unfunded liabilities, there are roughly 1,400 multi-employer pension plans in the United States, and almost all of them are less than 60% funded. The PBGC estimates that together these pension plans have promised $638 billion more than they are able to pay in benefits. While the 2008 financial crisis was certainly a factor in the current pension crisis, those managing these pension funds simply did not set aside enough funds to cover the promised benefits. As the number of workers paying into the system decreased and the number of retirees receiving benefits increased, these management practices became completely unsustainable. The miners' pension crisis specifically has been further exacerbated by numerous coal company bankruptcies, resulting partly from the onerous government regulations designed to put them out of business. The proposals before us today specifically address the fast approaching insolvency of the United Mine Workers of America miners' pension and health care funds by utilizing an existing mechanism in the operation of the Abandoned Mine Lands, or AML Fund. While the interest generated from the AML Fund is currently used to cover certain United Mine Worker health plans, these interest payments only cover a fraction of the cost of these plans. Because the AML Fund generates only about 40 to 50 million in interest per year, most of the UMWA health costs are already covered by payments directly from the U.S. Treasury. So if we were able to cover additional UMWA health plans and the 1974 pension plans under the same mechanism, most of this funding would actually be provided by hardworking taxpayers. While the current benefit crisis was not caused by the United Mine Workers of America miners or their dependents, we must remember that the taxpayers are also not at fault here. I hope we can find a solution that provides miners and their families with the benefits they deserve and minimize the impact to taxpayers. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Introduce today's first witness, Congressman David McKinley, representative for West Virginia's 1st Congressional District and the original sponsor of H.R. 935, the Miners Pension Protection Act. Mr. McKinley, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Subcommittee Chairman Lowenthal, Ranking Member Gosar, and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to speak this morning in support of H.R. 935, the Miners Pension Protection Act. For the last 6 years, I have been introducing this legislation and have led the fight in the House on this issue. But today, Chairman, this is a milestone. The first committee hearing we've had in the House about the miners' pension crisis. There's an analogy about the miners' pension crisis being like a check engine light on your car dash. For too long, Congress has ignored those blinking engine flashing lights. If we let it go much longer, we risk more damage and costlier fixes. Congress can do the right thing, Chairman. Pass this bill and provide peace of mind to the retirees all across America. Like you said, how did we get here? Let me start by emphasizing the problem with the UMWA pension fund was not caused by the miners. It was not caused by the employers either. This problem was caused in large part by government policy. Over the past decades, regulations and subsidies, enormous subsidies of renewable energies and competing energy sources has brought about the closure of hundreds of coal-fired power plants. According to a recent study by ACCE, 63% of the closures across America can be attributed to regulations. At the same time, the production of shale gas has grown rapidly, keeping gas prices low and depressing the use of coal. This has led to more than 50 bankruptcies of coal producers, just 3 since May of this year. As a result, fewer companies are paying into the pension fund. All this has happened when a pension fund has struggled to rebound from the 2008 financial crisis. Yes, there are problems with multi-employer pension funds across America, far beyond the UMWA fund. However, what we're here today about is this specific problem, these specific employees and retirees. The UMWA is different than many of the other troubled funds. Given the federal government's role in making this situation worse, Congress has an obligation to help fix it. Dating back, as you commented, the Truman administration, there is also a long precedent for the federal government's involvement in the UMWA pension funds. So the question is, what can Congress do about it? If we do nothing, in less than 3 years, the UMWA pension fund will be insolvent. Pensioners would be transferred to the Federal Pension Guarantee Fund, and over 100,000 retirees and widows would see deep benefit cuts. And we have a letter from the PBGC telling us that if this happens, if 100 and some thousand coal miners are transferred over to the Pension Guarantee Fund, they will go belly up in 1 to 3 years, causing a much broader problem. So doing nothing not only will hurt retired miners, but it puts nearly 1 million other pensioners across this country at risk. Again, this solution is not a solution to the broader challenges of the multi-employer pension fund, but it does address the issues right in front of us, the first major insolvency. And so it does with a funding source that is unique to the coal industry, one that already the health and retirement funds have been worked through the UMWA. Moreover, the bill does not change benefits to those states that they count on, like Wyoming and West Virginia and other coal-producing states. They stay the same. They're protected with this. Let's take a step back. It's easy to look at this crisis in numbers and cents and on paper, but we're talking about dollars and cents. This is about people. Look at the men and women in front of you today, behind me in this room today. They've spent their lifetime, Chairman, and you commented about it, empowering our country, doing difficult work, often challenging and dangerous work. They were promised these benefits would be there for them in their retirement. We're not talking about unreasonable gold-plated benefits. The average monthly benefit to a UMW coal miner is $586 a month. That's it. These retirees count on these benefits to pay for medicine, groceries, utility bills. More than 70 years ago, a promise was made by the federal government involving President Truman. Promise made should be a promise kept. These men and women deserve better. Congress should keep our promise and pass this bill. Chairman, I appreciate the time, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McKinley. I would like now to invite the second panel to take their seats at the witness table. Lewis is not here. Maybe we'll see. And Geezer? I don't know which one is Geezer? I want to thank all the witnesses for being here, and I want to introduce the witnesses. First, we have Mr. Cecil Roberts, President of the United Mine Workers of America. Next, Ms. Lorraine Lewis, Executive Director of the United Mine Workers of America's Health and Retirement Fund. Then we have Mr. Sam Ball, Westmoreland Coal Company retiree. And finally, we have Ms. Rachel Griesler, Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Let me remind the witnesses that they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but that the entire statement will appear in the hearing record. When you begin, the lights on the table in front of you will turn green. After 4 minutes, the yellow light will come on. Your time will have expired when the red light comes on, and I'm going to ask you to please complete your statement. I will also allow the entire panel to testify before questioning the witnesses. The chair now recognizes Mr. Roberts to testify.
Thank you very much, Chairman Lowenthal and Ranking Member Gosar, for this opportunity today. I come here today not to speak necessarily for myself or any particular position of the United Mine Workers. I've come here today to speak on behalf of 100,000 either retired or soon-to-be retired mine workers who have given their lives, sometimes their health, and sometimes their very well-being to this country. Many of these miners are like myself. I'm 72 years old. My dad was a coal miner. Both my grandfathers were killed in the mines. I never had the opportunity to meet either one of them. We talk about the 1946 strike that created the health and retirement funds when a president of the United States seized the coal mines and took it under the jurisdiction of the federal government, and that president was Harry Truman. He ordered the Secretary of Interior, Krug, to negotiate with the United Mine Workers because the major issue at the time with respect to workers was their future. Coal miners never had a future in 1946. Excuse me, because pneumoconiosis was running rampant. Miners died at a young age, and they left the mines in terrible health. No income after their employment in the mines. So Mr. Lewis, or President Lewis, decided something had to be done about this, it was actually a national disgrace. And President Truman, seizing the mines, realized that something had to be done also. As a representative, the highest representative of the federal government at the time. And I don't think any time in our history ever has this circumstance existed where the government took over an entire industry, ordered a cabinet member to negotiate with a union. This was the largest strike in the history of our country, by the way. Started on April 1st, 1946, and ended on December the 5th, 1946. Ironically, your first witness, me, I was born October 31st, 1946, and it dawned on me a few days ago. I was delivered by a company doctor in a company house, and my dad was on strike for health care and pensions, ordered by the United Mine Workers, and it was the right thing to do. And it was a very, very much a moral struggle, not just for the miners and their union, but this country. There has been a long, 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 undisputed involvement by the federal government after the 1946 strike and the agreement that was reached. And that spans all the way up to this very moment right now. And I have been president of the union for over 20 years, and I've lived through a lot of this. In 1947, the government ordered an investigation. The government did, the federal government, of the living conditions in the coal fields. Company houses, company towns, lack of health care. That was called the Boone Report. You can find that if you want to do some research about this. So there again, involvement by the federal government. More recently, I was a strike leader in the 1989 and 90 Pittston strike over health care and pensions. Once again, the federal government, the Republican president, President Bush, sent the Secretary of Labor to the coal fields, and she realized that she had to do something. So she appointed what was known as a super mediator, and a former Secretary of Labor was the super mediator, Bill Essery. He was instrumental in getting a resolution to this dispute and encouraging Pittston to stay in the pension plans and the health care plans. Subsequent to that was the Coal Commission, headed by Mr. Essery. And they found, by the way, and I know my time's running out here, but they found that, yes, in 1990, it was determined by a Republican president, Republican Secretary of Labor, and a former Secretary of Labor that was a Republican, that miners absolutely had a reasonable expectation for pensions and health care for the rest of their life, and it was something that the government promised. There's more to add to that, but I'll yield back my time at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. The chair now recognizes Ms. Lewis to testify.
Good morning. On behalf of our trustees, I am pleased to accept the subcommittee's invitation to testify. Through a combination of collective bargaining and government mandate, retired mine workers' pension and health benefits have been a part of the fund since 1946. Today, the funds consist of 6 plans, including the 1974 pension plan and the 1993 benefit plan. The pension plan provides pension benefits to about 81,500 retired coal miners or their widows. These pensioners, most of whom are elderly and many of whom have serious health issues, depend on their pensions to sustain them. Over 30% of the plan's beneficiaries are widows. 9% are retired miners disabled by mine accidents. Their benefits are modest. Over 30% of our pensioners receive less than $250 a month, and 58% receive less than $500 a month. The average benefit is $596 per month. The pension plan has been able to meet its obligations since it was established. As recently as 2008, the plan was 93% funded and was projected by our actuaries to remain well-funded into the foreseeable future. However, the plan's financial condition has deteriorated during the last 10 years due to several factors. The market crash of 2008, the declining base of contributing employers, the high ratio of retirees to working minors, high percentage of orphan beneficiaries whose former employers are not contributing to the plan, and the substantial number of major coal companies filing for bankruptcy and withdrawing. After the 2008 market crash, the plan lost significant market value. Unlike many other pension plans, it was not in a position to recover its losses. The decline in the coal industry and the bankruptcy filings of 4 major coal companies have left too few companies to contribute to the plan. The plan is unable to invest its way out of its financial position. It currently has $2.1 billion in assets and pays out about $600 million in benefit payments annually. While the plan is professionally managed through a combination of in-house investment staff and outside investment managers under contract to the plan, it has no choice but to invest its assets conservatively so as to have sufficient funds available to pay benefits over the next few years. An annual investment return of about 25% would be required to keep the plan solvent. Signatory employers are unable to contribute the full amount necessary to solve the problem. In 1994, there were 577 employers contributing. Today, there are 10. There are currently 28 pensioners for every working minor. It is estimated that the participating employers would have to pay approximately $90 for every hour worked to provide enough funding to continue paying all benefits provided for. Since 2008, bankruptcies of many coal companies, Patriot, Walter Energy, Alpha Natural Resources, and Mission Coal, have devastated the fund's contribution base. The bankruptcy courts freed these employers from their obligations to contribute to the plan, and the 1974 plan has been unable to collect the billions of dollars owed to it under ERISA's withdrawal liability rules. Over the last 10 years, the 1974 plan has assessed over $4 billion in withdrawal liability against bankrupt coal companies, but has received only $160 million from those companies, payments that represent less than 4% of what was owed. H.R. 935 would allow the plan to access monies not used by the fund's health plans under the 1992 Coal Act and subsequent legislation. The Coal Act provides federal transfers to cover the health costs of beneficiaries in the Combined Benefit Fund, the 1992 Benefit Plan, and the 1993 Benefit Plan. Transfers are first made from interest on the AML Reclamation Fund. If that interest is not enough, the plans also have access to mandatory spending of up to $490 million per year. The health plans have never accessed the full $490 million. H.R. 935 would raise that ceiling to $750 million. The benefit plan, the 1993 benefit plan, is one of the fund's health plans that receives federal transfers for its beneficiaries. All orphans whose last employers are out of business or released of their obligations by bankruptcy courts. The bill would extend eligibility under the 93 plan to retirees whose last employer filed for bankruptcy in 2018. The bankruptcy courts have left these employees without recourse for the loss of health benefits they worked their whole lives to earn. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. I now recognize Mr. Ball for 5 minutes of testimony.
Chairman Lowenthal, Ranking Member Kozar, members of the subcommittee, thank you for asking me to be here today. I am from St. Charles, Virginia, just a few miles from the Kentucky border in far southwest corner of Virginia. I went to work in the coal mines in September 1975 at the Shackford Coal Company in Kentucky, where I worked for 9 months before I was laid off. Then in June 1976, I was hired by the Westmoreland Coal Company at their Houghton mine in Virginia, where I worked until the mine shut down in 1995. I worked in various jobs all over the mine. I was also on the Health and Safety Committee of my local union, which meant I traveled with federal safety health inspectors underground wherever they went in the mine. I have arthritis from all the walking I did underground with the safety inspectors. I take 3 pain pills per day for that, but refuse to take any more because I do not want to get addicted to them like so many others in our area. Every 3 months, I get injections for my arthritis, 2 in my right ankle, 1 in my right hip. I take several other medications for other conditions I have, including balance issues, for which I need a very expensive eardrop. I also go to physical therapy every week for my balance. I have second-stage black lung in both lungs, but have been turned down for the federal black lung benefits because the government says the coal dust has not yet crystallized in my lungs, so I am not disabled enough to get those benefits. My lung doctor says there is no reason I should be denied these benefits, but the truth is what has happened to me is not unusual. Most people I know with black lung are denied benefits. I can tell you that I cannot walk across my yard without stopping. I do not have the breath for any activities. I sleep with an oxygen tube in my nose at night and need sleeping supplements to deal with that. I clear $475 per month from my pension after taxes. I have a small pension from the Virginia Department of Corrections where I worked for 10 years after my mine shut down, and I receive Social Security. That's it. I just break even every month. I do not have any savings. My home, my car are the only assets I have. Any reduction of any of these sources of income will have a severe impact on me. I am one of those 1,200 retirees who need you to pass both H.R. 934 and H.R. 935 because both their retiree health care and their pensions are on the chopping block. If I were to lose my health care, I don't have the resources to purchase a plan to make up the difference between what Medicare pays and what I need, especially with all the prescription medications I have. And to see my pension wiped out or even cut would mean that I could no longer break even, meaning I would soon have to sell my home and go live with my daughter if she could even take me in with her 3 children of her own. This is not what I expected would happen to me when I started working in the coal mines. We all knew the government's promise to coal miners, which was to make sure that our retirement would be guaranteed if the company we worked for was no longer around. I worked hard for almost 21 years underground, put my life and my health on the line every day, and helped Westmoreland Coal make a lot of money. Every contract we ratified said we were guaranteed health care and a pension for life. We agreed to that, even taking less in wages than we could have, because we knew we would need help in retirement when we were old. But somehow a bankruptcy judge took all that away. I don't understand how that can happen in America. There are hundreds more who are in my situation or worse in communities around where I live, and there are tens of thousands more across America who do not have the ability to survive without their pension or even a cut in their pension. Many of them don't have a second pension like I do with the Department of Corrections. I don't know how they make it now. Many more are widows of coal miners, and they really have almost nothing because most of them have never worked, so they do not have any Social Security of their own. They live on the reduced widow's UMWA pension and reduced Social Security from their deceased miner husband, that's all. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, every single one of us needs our health care and our pensions. Every single one of us believed our government promised to us and planned our retirement years based on that promise. Every single one of us is a patriotic, proud American who cannot understand how there are people in Washington who are willing to turn their backs to us. On behalf of not just the Westmoreland retirees who are losing their health care, but also every retired coal miner in America whose pension is at risk, I urge you to take action as soon as possible to get both of these bills passed. Our lives are at stake. You are our last hope. Thank you. I will answer any questions you may have as best I can.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. Now I will recognize Ms. Gressler for 5 minutes of testimony. Welcome.
Good morning, and thank you. I'd like to focus on 3 points this morning. First is the UMWA's pension plan. Second is the widespread multi-employer pension crisis and one proposal to address it. And last is to propose a set of reforms to protect workers and taxpayers. So first, the UMWA's pension plan. Roughly 96,000 coal miners whose benefits are at stake here did nothing wrong. They performed strenuous work in difficult conditions, and they sacrificed pay in exchange for future health and pension promises. But now their plan is less than 30% funded. It will be insolvent in 3 years, and at that point, many of them will receive reduced benefits from the PBGC. Despite what those workers' unions told them, the government had no role in their health and pension promises, nor in its insolvency. And I have the Krug-Lewis agreement here to prove that. The responsibility for these broken promises lies exclusively with the union officials and employer representatives who mismanaged those plans by paying benefits to workers who had not earned them, by consistently promising more than they should have reasonably set aside to pay, and by failing to reduce pension benefits and increase contributions after the shortfalls began accumulating. It's true that the UMWA and other pension plans have been hurt by an industry-wide decline, but that is not the reason for the pension shortfalls. Had the plans required adequate contributions from the beginning, it wouldn't matter if every single employer went out of business at the same time. The money should have been there for those workers. I understand the desire to help hardworking UMWA workers and retirees, but it's not Congress's role to pick winners and losers based on sympathy or political power. This gets to my second point, that the UMWA is only the tip of a $638 billion iceberg that is the multi-employer pension crisis. The UMWA represents fewer than 1% of the 10.6 million workers with multi-employer pensions, and 96% of those workers are in plans that are less than 60% funded. Unless Congress wants to propose 1,400 separate bills and hold 1,400 separate hearings such as this one, I suggest that policymakers instead work towards a more comprehensive solution to this crisis. The House will vote on such a proposal this week, but that proposal is a massive bailout without reform. The Rehabilitation for Multi-Employer Pensions Act would give insolvent pension plans direct taxpayer assistance and taxpayer-funded loans. Through this proposal, a plan like the Central State Teamsters estimated that it would receive between $20 and $25 billion in direct taxpayer funds, and then another $11 to $15 billion in taxpayer-funded loans. Theoretically, it would have to repay those loans after 30 years, but the legislation stipulates that that loan could be forgiven. The notion with providing plans government loans is that they could arbitrage them in the stock market, earn high returns, and then pay all their promised benefits and repay the loan. If that were a sound strategy, then why is the federal government not issuing $10 trillion in debt today, investing it in the stock market, and hoping to pay down the debt over 30 years? Moreover, if we're concerned about fairness, we have to ask, why would the federal government effectively guarantee 7.5% rates of returns for workers in union pension plans, but not workers in non-union plans, not public sector workers, and not for individuals who have a 401k or IRA? The multi-employer pension crisis is huge, and it requires solutions, but an open-ended bailout without reform would just reward and encourage more reckless actions, potentially driving up taxpayers' costs well above the $638 billion in unfunded promises. So if that's not a viable solution, what is? First, Congress needs to make the PBGC solvent over the long term through things like raising the base rate, adding a variable rate premium, and probably collecting some form of fee from retirees. Second, Congress needs to protect workers by changing the funding rules so that employers and unions cannot promise workers more than they set aside to pay. And finally, for those plans that are irreparable, Congress should alter the Multi-Employer Pension Reform Act rules so that they can more fairly minimize benefit reductions across workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gressler. I'm going to thank the panel for your testimony. I want to remind members of our committee that Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions. The chair is now going to recognize members for any questions that they may wish to ask for witnesses, and I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes. The first question is, Mr. Roberts, you testified about the creation of the UMWA health and pension plans in the 1946 agreement between President Truman and his administration and the union. That was just challenged, that there was no agreement. Can you respond to that?
Well, I think history is very clear about that. And sometimes if there's a dispute about that particular time in history, how the government has reacted to what the interpretation of that decision was. This government of ours has continuously, over a long, long period of time, treated this decision, this agreement between the government and our union as though it was a commitment and a promise to a particular group of workers. I would also encourage us not to complicate our hearing today with something that is not before us, and that's the dealing with all of the pension plans in America. We support a solution, but that's not what we're talking about here today, and sometimes we can confuse the issue when we do that. But there is vast amounts of evidence here that this government believed at the time they made a promise, and they've acted on it ever since 1946.
Maybe let's follow that up. Over the years, what other steps have been taken by Congress to help retired workers? Was that agreement the only time Congress has ever responded?
No, Mr. Chairman, if I could take a moment to try to clarify that. If you look between 1946 and up to the 90s, there were some different intervals, but I'd like to be a little more specific. And as I mentioned, as I ran out of time in my opening statement, that the President of the United States, which was a Republican, and a Republican Secretary of Labor, appointed another former Secretary of Labor that was a Republican, Bill Ussery. They created, after the strike at Pittston, what was known as the Coal Commission, and they took evidence from both the industry, historians, coal miners, widows, retirees. This was a long process. And at the end of this Republican-appointed commission, they determined, yes, miners were indeed promised health care. Now, they also were promised pensions. The reason that they specifically talked about health care is because that was the issue of the day. I would remind everybody here that the 1974 pension plan was fully funded in 2007. It was 93% funded, and the actuary in 2007, we'd be glad to furnish the actuarial report so that this plan would be fully funded over the next couple of years. Then the recession hit, and $2 billion was lost out of that fund, and $4 billion was lost in bankruptcy. So that's what happened to this plan, not mismanagement.
I want to follow up on that. So fully funded or almost fully funded in 2007, then the recession hits. So the question I have is, when did UMWA recognize that there was a problem? And what did you do about it? And you mentioned somewhat how we got there, that the recession hit. But what steps, how did you respond then when you first recognized it, and when was that?
Let me do two things, if you don't mind. I think
Certainly.
would help everybody here.
You only have 1 minute, though.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, we immediately, in negotiations, we brought this problem to Congress when we realized what had happened when $2 billion was wiped out of our pension plan, and the fact that we were paying at the highest amount in our history to the beneficiaries. It was $625 or $30 million a year at the time. So we lost $2 billion, paying at the highest level, and then the bankruptcy started. So what we have done is we've been here repeatedly at Capitol. We also increased the contribution rate from about $2 up to about $5.50. And I don't think there's a pension plan in America that's done anything like that. And we froze the pension plan also, by the way.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. I now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gressler, as you know, the 1974 pension plan is likely to go insolvent, become insolvent in the next few years. What caused the crisis in the first place?
Part of the crisis in this particular plan was the fact that they paid out benefits to workers who had not paid into the system sufficiently long to earn benefits. That was the first problem. The second major problem is
Before you go much further, what kind of percentage do those beneficiaries represent?
I don't have figures on that, but there were a lot more people in the plan then than there are today. It's a little bit like Social Security in that they started paying the benefits when people hadn't actually contributed to the system for a long time. And I suspect that it was a large percentage of them, since employment was higher then.
Would you be able to get us that information?
I don't think I have access to it. I suppose that Mr. Roberts or Ms. Lewis would be able to.
Ms. Lewis, Mr. Roberts, would you be able to facilitate that question?
Certainly, we would look to provide information in response to the question.
Perfect. Now, go ahead.
I was just going to add, I'm not, this was when I was about 4 years old, I think is what she was talking about, and I'm not 4 years old anymore. Sometime in the 50s, I think is what she's pointing to. But I don't think that's true, by the way.
I understand, Mr. Roberts, but one of the things is history actually has to be unraveled to be able to understand that. You may have been 4 years old, but there should be some records. Now, what discount rate does the UMWA's pension plan use now? And what discount rate has it used on average since its inception?
I think on average it's been about 7.5%, and I believe that they are using a significantly lower rate now, recognizing that the fund is becoming insolvent soon. The problem with using a 7.5% rate of return is that you are guaranteeing an asset in the future. When you are guaranteeing something, economists will universally say that you should be using a riskless rate such as the U.S. Treasury, and that's why you can make a plan appear to be 93 or 100% funded by using a certain discount rate, whereas if you were to use the appropriate one, it might only look 50% funded.
Now, earlier, Mr. Roberts made the comment that we're clouding this issue, that should be a single issue. UMWA is not in a unique place with their health care, are they?
They're not in a unique place with their health care or their pension. There are 1,400 other plans here, and I know that we do have this Krug-Lewis agreement at issue, and I don't argue that there wasn't an agreement made, and I absolutely agree that there were promises that were made to these coal miners. The issue is who made those promises. And the Krug-Lewis agreement specifically states that all authority for these pension and health benefit funds lied within the trustees themselves that came from the unions and the employers. The government never had a stake. They never sat at that table and negotiated what the contribution rates would be and what the accruals would be for the pensions or the health benefits.
Now, I really empathize with the miners, but we see this all across the country, do we not, with the pensions? I mean, states, this is precedent setting, would it not be?
It is, and that's the problem here, is that while there is great sympathy for all of these retired miners, there are plenty of other people. There are 1,400 other plans across all different industries, whether it be steel workers or truck drivers, and they are in similar situations here. And that's a $638 billion crisis. And if we look beyond that to firefighters and teachers and states and localities across the U.S., their governments have promised them $6 trillion worth of pension benefits that they have not set aside to pay them. So by opening the door to one particular plan, we're not isolating it, but we would be expanding it to potentially trillions of dollars.
Well, and I take it even further. States like Illinois and California, those pension plans are not solvent. And if you look at it, to be honest with you, the federal government and the Social Security benefits are not solvent either. So we're leaning on a system, a tipping tower of Pisa, are we not? We
are. And is the federal government being responsible for Social Security? I would argue that that would be the first crisis that it should address.
This is a sad situation, and that's why it needs a comprehensive review. And my heart goes out to the miners. You know, my dad was a geologist, so we are very, very familiar with the conditions that they've been placed under. But this is a complex issue, and unfortunately, I don't see people in this Congress taking on big challenges and coming up with a creative solution. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Chairman Grijalva for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for scheduling the hearing. This hearing is on some very vital and I may say critical legislation that's before us, and also want to thank you, Chairman, for exerting the jurisdiction that we do have to have this hearing. Thank the witnesses and the guests for being here and for the work that you're doing on this issue. And to me, this issue really comes down to fairness, above all. That, you know, we can have the debate about cause. Is it the regulations? Is it environmental laws? Is it health and safety laws and regulations that are affecting the coal industry, and that's why we're in this situation? We can have, and we should have that effect, because some of us will argue that we might want to take a look at the market as well. But today we're dealing with effect. And the human consequences that people who worked in this very hard and dangerous job of coal mining, commitments that were made that need to be kept. And I don't think it's fair to steal the security from people who have worked their entire lives being told that they would be taken care of when they got old and when they got sick. I don't think it's fair that bankruptcy courts treat longstanding agreements and obligations to workers as the easiest thing that a company can get rid of in that proceeding. I don't think it's fair that coal company executives, after the bankruptcies, grab their golden parachute, fully intact, make a nice landing, and those people that worked for decades and decades in those mines are left to carry the burden. So I think that it's important that we deal with what's in hand here. The health, the commitment that this government made long ago to, after their hard work in an industry that helped build this nation, that they be made whole and that there be comfort and security in their retirement and in their lives and the lives of their families. That's what this hearing is about. It's about fairness. And so let me ask you, Mr. Ball and Mr. Roberts, are these bills that we're talking about today a bailout? Because that's kind of what people are saying. Or is it, as I stated and you stated, a fulfillment of a commitment, a promise, if you want to call it that, that's been made for decades? Let me begin with you, Mr. Ball, and then if you don't mind, Mr. Roberts. Sir?
No, sir, I do not see this as a bailout. I feel it's a fulfillment of the promise that was made to us, and it should be kept.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts?
Certainly not a bailout. I think back to the $1 trillion that was appropriated by Congress to bail out the people who caused the problem of the recession to begin with. And I don't fault that. But when it comes to miners who worked all their lives to energize this nation, provided the cheapest electricity in the world for 100 years, I think the promises made to them should be kept by this government.
Mr. Chairman, I think there's ways to address the loss of jobs in the industry. I think there's ways to, and before us, we have a means to protect the retirees and their families who depend on these benefits to pay their living expenses, literally. And one of these ways that we have before us in our jurisdiction is to move this bipartisan legislation and move it through the process as expeditiously as we can. And with that, Mr. Chairman, again, my thanks, and I yield back.
Westerman. Thank you, Chairman Grijalva. I now recognize Mr. Westerman for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. The situation you're facing specifically with coal mining is not necessarily applicable to my state, although there is a little bit of coal mining there. And I agree with Chairman Grijalva that this is not fair. I mean, when I listen to your stories and what's the situation you're in, I know that you're just hardworking people that went to work to do your job, and you were promised certain things, and now those things aren't being delivered. The part I'm not understanding is exactly who made those promises and who are the violators of the fairness in this situation, and whose responsibility is it to make things right if things can be made right. And I know this is one group, but this affects many pension plans all across the country in different areas. I think back to, this is a crisis that didn't start just today, and there's states that have worked to fix problems with pension plans. I know that Ranking Member Bishop, when he was in the Utah legislature, they made some really tough decisions many years ago to stabilize the pension plans in Utah. And because they faced up to the problem and made those decisions, pension plans in Utah are in much better shape than they are in many other places across the country. Ranking Member Gosar talked about pension plans in Illinois. And this is a major, major issue facing our country. But the solution to this one particular problem, which could set a precedent as we move forward and look at other pensions, doesn't necessarily seem like a well thought out solution. If we've got a plan that's only 60% funded, and the solution is just to take money from either the AML fund or taxpayer money directly out of general revenue and put it into the pension plan to make that whole, that it seems to me like there could be a better solution than that. And Ms. Gessler, can you tell me, is there a better way to approach this to meet the needs of not only this particular pension plan, but other pension plans that are in as bad or worse situation across the country where false promises were made and they haven't been kept, and it's not the fault of those people who were going out and working hard every day, it was the fault of the people that made the false promises.
Yes, exactly. And I do think that there are better solutions going forward. And the most fair way to do that is not to involve taxpayers and have them reward reckless behavior that took place that would then just further incentivize the same type of behavior and drive up the underfunding in the future. So some of the things that I think that Congress should be looking at specifically is the PBGC first. We need a pension backstop so that plans that do go under, the retirees don't receive only 10% of what they were promised. The PBGC should be able to provide what it is insured, and so I think that they need to significantly increase the rate. The multi-employer program, up until recently, was charging only $9 per year for an insurance policy that pays you up to $17,000 per year in benefits. The single employer's plan has a maximum that's 20 times as high as the current rate for the multi-employer program. So we need to raise the rates. There also needs to be a variable rate premium in there, because as it is today, a plan that is 10% funded pays the exact same $29 per year as a plan that is 100% funded. It's just sound insurance policy to have variable rates in there. And this is something that both the Obama and the Trump administration have proposed. I think you need to freeze insolvent plans. You need to stop the bleeding and don't allow plans to continue making promises that they know they cannot keep. That's, again, something that's done for single employer plans, but not for union-run pension plans. In terms of allowing the plans to actually minimize pension losses, I think that we need to reform the rules so that it makes it easier that you can reduce benefits earlier by a smaller amount and then not penalize the younger workers. And then also we need to fix it going forward. The problem with all the bills that are being considered is that they are bailouts, and they're bailouts without reform. And so you just exacerbate the problem and continue to incentivize plans to make promises that they can't pay in the future with no consequence. To do that, there need to be reasonable discount rate assumptions. We need to have an excise tax so that if you don't make the contributions that you're required to make, then you have to pay a fee for that. Again, single employer plans do this, union plans don't. And then I think we need to freeze the insolvent plans. If you're digging yourself deeper into a hole every year, as 83% of multi-employer plans currently are, you shouldn't be able to keep making promises at all.
Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Westerman. That concludes the questions from the committee. What I'd like to do before we close is to ask each member with 1 minute was there any question that you wish you had been asked that we did not ask you, or was there some point that you were trying to explain that you'd really like to clarify? You have 1 minute. I'm going to start with Mr. Roberts. Question that you'd like to ask, or you want to clarify anything?
Well, first of all, the words false promise, there's not been a false promise identified here. There's been a dispute about whether the government made a promise or not, but from 1946 until 2008, there was absolutely no question about the fact that this fund was ran and operated without any problems. It wasn't until the recession hit that this problem existed, and then the bankruptcies on top of that. No one can make an argument here that what happened with these funds, the 1974 pension plan, was somebody mismanaged a fund. If you want to go back and think somebody got in the plan in 1948 or 49, it shouldn't. Perhaps that evidence should be submitted, but that's not what happened here. The fund was well on its way to being fully funded based on actuarial assumptions that were provided to anybody who would like to have seen them in 2007 leading up to 2008. So that's a false statement that's been made here.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. Ms. Lewis, any question you'd like to have been asked or anything you'd like to clarify?
Thank you, and I'll be happy to provide information about the beginning of the funds for the record. That is not my understanding of the history. And in any event, the 6 decades of activity, contributions, and payments at no point jeopardized the fund. It was the market crash of 2008 and the actions of the bankruptcy court since then that have led to the nearly $7 billion in unfunded liability. I'd also like to add that the management of the funds is professional and prudent. The trustees are held personally liable under ERISA for all of their activities solely on behalf of the beneficiaries. The management of the funds is professional. It's subject to audit. We are a highly regulated and oversighted and audited entity, and we'd be happy to answer any other questions the committee has.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Mr. Ball, anything you'd like to? 1 minute.
The only thing I'd like to say again, Mr. Chairman, is I want to stress again that it's very important that these 934 and 935 gets passed. The number of people that this is affecting, it will absolutely ruin them. And I just can't stress it enough that we do need your help, and we need these 2 passed. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Gressler, in conclusion.
Yes, I would just like to address the solvency of the plan and the issue of the interest rate fundings. I know that the stock market crash played a significant role here, but if you look over the history and you are guaranteeing a promise, then you should be anticipating that there will be ups and downs in the market, and it's not appropriate to use a 7.5% or 8% estimated rate of return. What's more appropriate is a discounted treasury rate. And so I think that if those more appropriate rates had been used, the plan would be better funded today. I also just want to touch on the notion of fairness here, because I think that that's something that we all agree on. What is happening to the mine workers and what will eventually happen to 10.5 million other retirees and union-run pension plans is absolutely not fair. They had promises made to them, and those promises are going to be broken. But what's even more unfair is to pass those promises on. I don't think that any of these workers here today would agree to a solution that took a loan out in the name of their children or grandchildren in order to guarantee 100% of their promises. But that's what we're talking about, except extending it to taxpayers. I don't think that's something that we should be doing, and we shouldn't be picking in winners and losers here and saying, we will do this for one plan, maybe we'll do it for 1,400 plans, and then maybe we'll do it for everybody.
Thank you. And I want to thank all the witnesses for your testimony and the members for your questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we'll ask you to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for the responses of the witnesses. If there's no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned. All right, I'm going to go up there and thank them. And you can take this.